You're making a major speech tomorrow criticizing President Obama for cutting $1.2 billion for missile defense from the next Pentagon budget. Why is that a mistake?
Well, with what's happening right now in Iran and particularly in North Korea, I think every American recognizes that the best tool we have to rein in North Korea and Iran and to protect the American people is to have a very robust missile defense system. And the President is cutting by 15% the funding of our Missile Defense Agency. He's pulling back on the number of interceptors that we're going to have in Alaska, which is where we desperately need them. And at the same time, he's cutting back on our funding for European missile defense by 80%. It is simply the wrong way to go. And I know that there's some liberals who've always been opposed to the fact that Ronald Reagan was the author of this idea of defending ourselves from nuclear attack. But with rogue nations like North Korea and Iran headlong in their course to have intercontinental ballistic missiles tipped with nuclear warheads, America needs to protect itself.
But Defense Secretary Gates says that his budget still devotes over $9 billion to missile defense, and it includes 30 interceptors up there in Alaska for those North Korean missiles, which he says is more than enough to protect this country against the North Koreans for years.
This isn't a time to be cutting back on missile defense. And so taking from 45, which was the original plan for the missile defense in Alaska, down to 30 is not the right direction to go, particularly as North Korea is developing this technology. North Korea is in contempt of the world and the United States. On the very day the President gives a speech about nuclear nonproliferation, North Korea carries out a missile test. And then on our Memorial Day, they carry an underground nuclear explosion. They're making it very clear that they're thumbing their nose at the world. And with a rogue nation like that, you have to be very aggressive in defending ourselves with missile defense. And that's why I would be adding to our expenditures, not cutting back on the budget. We have a president who has added trillions of dollars to federal spending. We just put almost $800 billion into a stimulus plan. Not $1 of that is going to modernize our military. It is a course which I find very difficult to understand.
You have taken a middle ground, I think it'd be fair to say, on the nomination of Judge Sotomayor. You called it, quote, troubling, but unlike some others, you haven't opposed her. What do you think of Newt Gingrich and Rush Limbaugh calling her a racist?
Well, I disagree with them. I think this is a process where you have an individual who's intelligent, well-educated, with an extensive record. She deserves a full and fair hearing, and I listened to the prior senators on your show. They intend to give her that. I think in the final analysis, we'll make a decision based upon her clarification of some very troubling comments and also her discussion of some cases that are troubling. The Ritchie case, the Maloney case, both of those are very troubling. But we'll have a chance to hear what she has to say, and we'll. I'm not a senator; I don't get to vote in that regard. But those that are senators, I hope, give a thorough examination to her judicial philosophy, which quite apparently is a philosophy of saying, look, we're not going to follow the law; we're instead going to bend the law to do what we think empathetically is the right thing to do. And I don't think a judge who tries to assess which person more deserves the right conclusion, as opposed to what does the law demand, is the kind of judge America wants.
Let's step back for a minute and take a bigger picture, because that's what this whole series is about. How do you think President Obama is doing, and what do you think the Republican approach should be in dealing with him?
Well, first of all, I think the Republican approach should be to hold true to the principles that we know are right for America and for our future. Fundamentally, Republicans believe that individuals and individual freedom are what built America and will build a more prosperous future. And Barack Obama and his team have made it very clear they have a very different view. They believe that an all-powerful, growing government is the right course for America's future. It is a very dramatic difference between the two. So when Barack Obama has a stimulus plan, it includes a lot more money from government. When the Republicans put forward our stimulus plan, it said put the individuals in charge, help small business. When they look at health care, the Democrats say, look, we want government to take over health care because it's not working well. Republicans say, how can we give individuals more authority and responsibility for the health care system so they can have better care under their direction? It's a very stark difference. And I think you're going to find philosophically the American people will recognize that the bailouts, that the growth of government is the wrong course for America, and instead the principles of the Republican Party will keep America stronger with a brighter future.
Let's talk about one of the president's big initiatives in an area that you have a lot of personal and even family history in, and that, of course, is the auto business. It looks like General Motors will file for bankruptcy tomorrow, with the government putting up a total, what they did in the past and what they're going to do now, of $50 billion and taking roughly a 70% ownership stake. Back in November, you wrote an article in which you said, this is before there'd been any bailouts by President Bush, no bailouts, let's go to a managed bankruptcy. Looking back, Wouldn't that, at a time when we were in the depths of the recession, when we were really right in the midst of what looked like a financial crisis, wouldn't that have been disastrous for the economy?
It would have been precisely the right thing to do for the economy. To help General Motors at that point, before it had received tens of billions of dollars from the government, go through a structured process, either in court or out of court, to rid itself of its excessive union contract obligations, would have been the right course. And at that point, government could have helped with warranty guarantees and so forth, with debtor and possession financing to get the company back on its feet. We wouldn't have closed the business down or liquidated. We instead would have helped it restructure at a time when government funding was not going to add billions of dollars to the American taxpayer's burden. It was the right course to take. It's being taken now, too late, unfortunately. And as a result, the government ends up with over 70% of GM and the UAW some 17%. Look, let me talk about going forward. The right thing going forward for General Motors and for our government is to get government out of the direction of General Motors. President Obama should indicate that immediately upon this bankruptcy, all of the shares held by government will be distributed to the American taxpayers, and therefore that the public will be able to vote just like shareholders. And likewise at the UAW, the head of the UAW ought to indicate all of our shares are going to our members, not to the head of the UAW. We don't want a president and a head of the UAW running General Motors. The American public ought to own that enterprise.
So who would run General Motors?
Well, the shareholders. The shareholders, and you'll see Americans trade shares, buy and sell amongst themselves. They'll probably consolidate. There'll be shareholder meetings. They can elect their board of directors, and the company will be run to create products that Americans want. They can be competitive globally. They can hire and fire the CEO as they want. You don't want politicians in Washington saying, okay, we want you to build this kind of car. Oh, that factory over here, it's in Senator so-and-so's district, and you can't close that one even though it's the high-cost factory. You have to open another one over here. You don't want politics directing American corporations. That whole approach, which obviously is one that Barack Obama is wedded to, is the wrong approach for America. Americans recognize it. Individuals, the free market system is what has built America to the nation we are, and that's how we ought to go forward.
But, Governor, for all the doomsayers, Chrysler got a bailout. Now it's gone through bankruptcy. Seems to be speeding through bankruptcy court. They're going to basically be bought by Fiat, and they're going to, it looks like, be a viable company within some period of time, maybe weeks.
Precisely my view. That's why I wrote as I did in November, that these companies need to go through a process of shedding their excess costs, hopefully outside the bankruptcy court. But in fact, both of them look like they'll go into bankruptcy court. But let me underscore one thing, Chris, and that is, this is a real sad day. I mean, I'm a son of Detroit. My dad was an auto executive. You know, I drive American cars. I love American cars. My heart bleeds for the people in Michigan and Detroit, for all those auto workers. This is a very, very sad circumstance for this country, and it represents bad decisions by management, overreaching by the UAW. It's really tragic in a lot of respects, and it has not been well played, either in my view by the Bush administration or by the Obama administration.
When you look, I want to switch to the main subject here, which is the future of the GOP. If you look at the GOP since 2004, you've lost ground in the West and the Southwest. You've lost ground in the mid-Atlantic states like Virginia and North Carolina. And in your home region, New England, not a single Republican congressman anymore. Aren't you in danger of becoming a mostly white, mostly Southern regional party?
You know, there have been other times when our party has been written off, and there have been times when the Democratic Party has been written off. And what typically happens is that the party that gets all the power starts thinking good about themselves and overreaches, and the American people say they've gone too far. That happened to us. I think we made mistakes when we had the leadership of Congress, and I think you're seeing the President and Democratic leaders in the House and the Senate making mistakes that will make them far more vulnerable to a correction, a mid-course correction. And I think you'll see the Republican Party come charging back. I was just in Virginia. Bob McDonnell there running for governor. I think he's going to win. Chris Christie, New Jersey. I think you're going to see the two governors' races this year both go to Republicans, because people recognize that this Democratic administration is taking us far too far to the left. And America is fundamentally a center-right nation. And if we hold true to our principles and do a better job communicating those principles and holding true to them, right, acting as we speak, I think the American people will put us back in a position of leadership.
Is it enough to just say we're going to hold true to, and a lot of people say, the Reagan principles? Don't you have to have new answers for the new problems that people face?
Sure, and as the world changes, you have to make sure that those principles are applied to the new reality. So, for instance, our health care challenge today is 47 million people without health insurance. And we know our principles. We believe in markets and individuals. So we look at that problem and say, how how can we get individuals to have more control over their health care? And one way that's been proposed is to let people buy their own private insurance plan and be able to own it, change as they change jobs, they still own that insurance plan. It's a Republican, free market-oriented plan. The Democrats have a different plan. It's not working, so we're going to have government give folks a government insurance product. And that, in my view, is putting us on a course to become like Canada or Great Britain, which have far inferior health care systems.
We've got a couple of minutes left.